lights now half price. Add some festive cheer with artificial Christmas trees up to 50% off. And deck the halls with all Christmas decorations now up to half price. Woody's. We're all homemakers. T's and C's and exclusions apply.
You ain't shit! I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
Well, fans can be the harshest critics, you know.
And they often are.
A wife is often the harshest critic of her husband.
I thought I was invincible. That's what you're trained to believe as a sports person.
There was 4 million people in Ireland who knew much more about managing football teams than I did. When it comes to music, I can spoof with the best.
Your sporting career is the best time you'll have, and you know you have to hang on to it for as long as you like, because everything else is pretty crappy.
And this is not lies. Stephen Rothschild has never spoken to Jim McGuinness in his life.
You're very welcome along to our Saturday panel, which today is in association with the Government of Ireland's No Excuses campaign. Enough is enough. Let's stop excusing sexual harassment and sexual violence. You can learn more at gov.ie/no excuses, or in an emergency, just call 999. As you can imagine, we are going to be covering some pretty sensitive subjects over the next hour. So if there are any younger ears or sensitive ears listening, you might want to tune in again in about an hour's time. But it will all be up on podcast. If you do want to listen back, it'll be on offtheball.com and on the Go Loud app as well. So let's remind ourselves of the ad campaign that's running around No Excuses at the moment.
When he steps out of the showers, his teammates slag him off.
Are you hiding something from us?
He plays along at first, but then they gather around him, whip his towel off, make videos of him. Those who see he's upset laugh it off, saying,
We're just having a laugh. Sure, what's the harm?
Enough is enough. Let's stop excusing sexual harassment and sexual violence. Learn more at gov.ie/no excuses, or in an emergency call 999. This is an initiative of the Government of Ireland.
So that is the ad campaign that I'm sure everyone is very familiar with at this stage. We want to talk about this from more of a sporting perspective, around locker room culture, around bullying and around toxic masculinity. And to talk about that, I'm joined in studio by the former Wexford hurler Diarmuid Lyng, from Lisa Fallon, who is the Chelsea women's coach and a regular pundit now on RTE, and also by Cliona Sadlier, who is the Executive Director of Rape Crisis Network Ireland. Thanks for joining me in studio. Cliona, you might talk to us about this campaign then, this No Excuses campaign that is currently running, and what you hope to achieve from it.
Right, so the idea behind this is, we can do an awful lot of work in and around rape and sexual violence. We're all agreed, the vast majority of the population are agreed it's a terrible thing and we want to stop it. And we can fix the justice system, we can fix, as far as we can, a lot of the responses that we're going to be doing. But actually what we really want to do is to stop it from happening in the first place. So this ad is really about engaging in a conversation and going, right, can we join up all the dots here? Can we look at what's happening right down the start of that process? What permissions, what sort of culture are we building? What permissions are we giving? What are we saying is normal? What are we saying is okay? And how does that connect into actually the type of perpetration of sexual violence and the prevalence of sexual violence that we have today? Because I suppose at the heart of this is that we really believe we can prevent sexual violence. We don't need to have 1 in 4 women experiencing rape in their lifetime. We don't need to have that statistic. We can change that. But we need to move back up the river. So this ad is, in terms of the locker room, it's fantastic because it's, it's really going to an everyday moment in people's lives and going, right, how do we understand our role here? How do we understand what we're building here in terms of, if you like, the attitudes we have to each other, ourselves, the respect, the bullying? Does bullying connect into, at some point, a permissiveness to cross a line? And when does that line get to cross another line? And when does that line become sexual violence? So that's really what we're looking to have here, is a conversation.
And that ad brings another level to that conversation as well, because generally when we talk about sexual violence, it's male on female, whereas, as you see from that bullying culture within that dressing room, there can also be an undercurrent of male on male sexual violence.
Absolutely, and the numbers are are interesting in terms of male and female, because this is a very gendered type of crime. So what we see for children is that the numbers remain the same. So by and large, the girl child is slightly more vulnerable than the boy child, but they're almost equal. It's just when you start hitting puberty that you see the teenage girl, and then the woman remains just as vulnerable to sexual violence. It just changes in nature, but the boy child becomes less and less vulnerable to be targeted for sexual violence. But it does happen to men, and generally for men, it's male on male, and oftentimes It is, you know, a lot of the male-on-male sexual violence as adults can be around, if you like, disciplining men who are seen to not conform to a type of masculinity. So it's, in some ways, it is, you know, a lot of the male-on-male violence is misogyny-driven. So it's about feminizing men and punishing them for being too feminine or something. You know, so for transgressing, if you like, against what is expected of what's a man. So, yeah, so the story for male victims is quite complex, especially for adult male victims.
We spoke a lot, probably 18 months ago at this stage, about toxic masculinity and that locker room culture in the wake of the Belfast rape trial, and Paddy Jackson and Stuart Olding acquitted of the rape charges. But the fallout from the WhatsApp messages and the way they spoke about women brought about something of a national conversation, certainly for a few weeks, about the way young men speak about women. It's not that long ago, but have you found a change in attitudes over the past 18 months?
I think it is transformative. I mean, that conversation was transformative. And yes, there is always, you know, backsliding from that sort of national conversation, and something cracked open then. And I think what we, in that conversation, what we were given permission as a public was to actually engage at this level and go, hang on a second, it's not just for laughs. It's not just harmless fun. It's not just banter. There's an impact. It leaks out of these closed, you know, it may be the locker room, maybe a WhatsApp group. It leaks out, and it actually has an impact on how we behave. So I think that was the real. It gave us permission to have these conversations, I think.
Yeah, I think that when you're in a WhatsApp group or with that dressing room culture, one of the things that I would have experienced, at least, is that anything that I was uncertain of or imbalanced in myself, that I was looking outside for validation or for further understanding or for a positive role model of a type of behaviour or whatever, when I was looking for those things and when they came in the shape of a dressing room culture that was less than positive, that intensified and increased the chances that I would begin to embody that. Now, that's far from... That's not to say they were responsible then for my actions, who subsequently would have damaged other people. Ultimately, I took in my imbalance or my uncertainty into the environment, and then that proliferated in that lack of understanding. So for me, definitely, I find that it's like self-responsibility for what I know is maybe males in sport more. And what I feel about that is, and when I look back to because I feel in these conversations I'm talking to my 23-year-old self and my 20-year-old self and my 16-year-old self, who didn't respect women in the way that was suitable to the type of people that they were, or maybe sought people out who I didn't feel were worthy of respect, and so it was maybe something of a control thing on some subtle level, I'm not sure. But I definitely want to talk to that young fella, and I think to the current crop who are coming up through the organisation or through the locker rooms of the day, to say that what you see here, I think we'll get into it later, whether it's challengeable or not, for a 17-year-old to come into a dressing room dynamic of 26 and 27-year-olds. In some cases it's done. In I'd say 99% of cases, I would probably say that it's not, and it's an interesting case where self-preservation takes over in those surroundings, and also the kind of, in some senses, the laughability of somebody saying, "Oh, you know, don't talk about this girl that way," and it's just amongst fellas, like it's greeted in a kind of, well, that's what the women would say, and now you're bringing that into us. So, but I still do want to talk to that young fella and maybe look for probably more positive role models, definitely. And I would also call our organisations, our sporting organisations, to task as well, in terms of the type of environment that we're creating based on what we view high performance culture to be, issues around the openness of communication that's possible that will actually, funnily enough, further performance, which is what they're all looking for. But when it's limited to the sporting sphere and sporting understanding of what excellence is, it becomes hugely limiting, and I think that certain dynamics take over, like we see in the video here. That it's the macho, the jock kind of, who's versus the vulnerable kid who can't really defend himself. It's like this dynamic that takes over, and you see those. You mentioned it. If someone comes in wearing red pants or no laces in their shoes, and all of a sudden they're lit upon because they don't conform to a certain stereotype as to what a player, a GAA person should be, or a soccer person or a rugby person should be. So I think it's up to the organisation and to all of us within the organisation. It is very vague. I mean, I don't know who it's up to. I just know that we're all in it, so we're all responsible for it. Is the challenge, well, who holds the dressing room? Who holds control? And why are those characters coming to the surface? Are they naturally coming to the surface because they always would? Because that's just the group dynamic? Or is it does it suit the sport, the team dynamic of trying to beat the guy up the road who you're supposed to hate or you're supposed to want to be better than? Do those two things go hand in hand?
You said there, Gizzy, you'd love to talk to your 17-year-old self. When you look back to the latter stages of your career, did you see any change in that culture, both within yourself and within the dressing room? Because I'm just looking at some of the statistics that you sent on, Cliona, and this Gender Matter in Ireland 2019 survey, a relatively high number of people said they believed women are to blame for lack of respect and even abusive towards themselves. But in the focus group research, the gender gap probably comes true, that while young women regard macho or lad culture as a big issue, older men, parents, generally consider it as just natural jostling and bravado, while older women said that young men can be vulnerable to the way girls might dress or act. And that was sort of the way we were brought up, was that lads be lads, let them at it. Did you notice that changing as you were one of the older heads in the dressing room, that the younger lads coming through had a slightly different attitude, or did they just fit into the dressing room culture, never really changed?
It definitely changed, and it's such as I'm jogging through it, Nathan, there's different. It changed very much for the positive in some respects, in that the younger lads who came in were a product of the internet generation, who had this open access to information in a way that we wouldn't have had as young people. So they brought in a fresh set of ideas and a fresh way of looking at the world. I mean, I think there's no secret that porn has also played a huge part in that as well, and that's been a part of the internet revolution, in the privatisation and the locking of that away into little small cells of bedrooms and privacy, and so that obviously had an effect as well. But I don't know how much is. I look back at some of the fellas who I started with, and they were good men. They were good, strong men, and they weren't closed down in their manhood. It wasn't that they were stoic and stunted. They were just good, strong men. And when I was leaving, I felt that the cult of I had taken over the dressing room a little bit more. It was a little bit more about the how it looked and how it was to be one of the county players. That didn't seem to be there to me, at least at the start. Now, I don't know that I go on that change, and I was observing it then in other people as a reflection. I couldn't tell you, but as far as I could observe, it got locked down more into the mirror muscles, high performance, this kind of physical prowess that was sometimes not related to the game at all. It just seemed to be this thing that you wanted to do I don't know, I didn't really understand it, why they wanted to do it, because to me everything was to forward the game. So it went on there was significant changes, but I couldn't say in relation to that, it definitely triggers a bit of, I don't know, healthy, I feel, defensiveness in me in the conversation as a man too, where sometimes I think there can be in sports dressing rooms, maybe male dominated. I'm sure Lisa can talk more about the female dressing rooms, but that this culture, this kind of men just jostling for position, kind of the older generation, who said that's just the way young fellas are, and sometimes I think that proliferates very, very quickly into, well, they're the early signs. That's like the gateway drug. He's going to go from smoking a joint to taking heroin now very, very quickly. That's this is this culture of macho talk, and all of a sudden he's going to be assaulting somebody and sexually assaulting somebody. And I think there's a huge part in the middle of that, and I think we lose in that conversation very, very quickly. We lose a lot of men who are just like, I can't even listen to that conversation of someone telling me that because I take part in this, which is actually an affirmation in some respects of the dynamic between men, that's all of a sudden an attack on women. It's far too much for them to process. And I think, and I see why, you know.
And I think the ad obviously is men on men, you know, that particular ad we've just seen. So there isn't that leap straight to, you know, violence against women. Because it is looking at how men discipline each other through violence and domination. And I think, you know, you're talking about that sort of, you know, the sports performance and that, you know, is it necessary to have this hierarchy, to build this hierarchy, to have excellence? You know, that is it a, you know, that competitiveness, does it go hand in hand with, you know, is your validation based on domination and dominance? You know, so what's, you know, is there elements of this that we can unpick? And, you know, so I'm interested in how, you know, we work towards excellence without that other, the uglier side, if you like.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I think what we're probably dealing with here is a normalised behaviour in certain cultures as opposed to what is perceived as being normal behaviour. So the first part for me, and probably the most important part, is the actual recognition of the fact that that behaviour is not normal, or it's not what somebody would do outside of the locker room, or would they send that message to their wife or to their daughter or to their mother. And if someone has a message like that they wouldn't send, then straight away there is a recognition and there is an awareness that it's not the right thing to do.
Are those conversations happening?
Well, I think, and to pick up on the bravado and all of that stuff, I think sport has gone through a bit of an evolution where you do have to be extremely fit, extremely strong. Your physical attributes have to be exceptional to perform for excellence. However, I do think there is a shift now where we're starting to look at more game intelligent players. So it's not all about bravado. It's about being able to make good decisions and make them quickly and execute them well. So you're encouraging, what you need now to perform at the highest level are athletes who can make good decisions. And I think that in itself is going to bring a new level of evolution, and I think we're seeing it as well. I don't think, and like even if you look back at, you know, and you listen to stories about professional football in England from years and years ago, about the initiations that went on and the things that went on in dressing rooms, they're no longer acceptable anymore. So there is definitely a change. Has it come far enough yet? It probably hasn't, but the fact that the conversations are happening means it's generating an awareness that that behaviour does not have to be complied with, because sometimes people comply, and maybe you'll know this, that players feel an obligation to comply in order to be accepted into a dressing room scenario. But I don't, and I do think that can be managed. But I think as well there is a huge, I've done a lot of work on this in terms of coaching and doing my coaching badges and my professional management training. But it's about unconscious bias, that people have stereotypical views that they don't actually know that they have, or that they're not quite what they should be. And we're all guilty of it. And once you first get the awareness of it, that's the biggest step. Because while it's unconscious and while you don't know about it, that it's wrong or that it shouldn't be engaged in, or that you don't have to, or that you can change it, then it's a normalised behaviour. So when you have that awareness, then suddenly you have to make a decision. Now when you're making a decision, then you have responsibility. And I found when I was working in dressing rooms, and I've worked in men's football at the highest levels in this country for nearly 10 years now, and I found that, did I have certain challenges? I did. But did I have more abnormal experiences than normal or respectful experiences? No. So they were in isolation. So I don't know if being female in the dressing room environment change some of the behaviours.
Do you think it
naturally.
did? Like, you obviously only know your experiences, but from what you would hear anecdotally from the dressing room under a male coach, do you think players, young men, acted differently when you were in the room than if you weren't?
Possibly, because I didn't see what they were doing when I wasn't in there, but my experience would generally be that when you're in a dressing room, if it's before a game or half-time, people are not on their phones using WhatsApp groups. People are talking about what do we need to do to win this match.
But when the match finishes, they are, and they're having a bit of crack. There is a bit of banter, and that's when suddenly things start going that little extra step too far. As a coach, do you take responsibility for that?
Yes.
Why?
I take responsibility for what I will or won't accept.
And are you proactive in that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to give guidelines, because I found when I was in the dressing room at the start that it was unusual for me to be... It was a new experience. I hadn't had any other experience of being a female coach or, you know, somebody who works in that analysis capacity in a male dressing room. I didn't have anyone I could phone up and ask and say, how did you find it? What challenges did you come up against? So the responsibility was on me to, number one, set my own red lines. But number two, I also had to acknowledge this is actually different for them as well. They've not had a female in here in this capacity too. So it was very much new ground for everybody concerned. And then what happened was quite interesting, that I became normalised in that environment. So the lads then, it comes to a point where they don't bat an eyelid when you're in there, and it's normal. But if you signed a new player who came in who hadn't been in a dressing room, it might be unusual for them. And it's about that awareness. And
I think one of the things that happens, Lisa, and I'd be very critical of the high performance model of sport at the moment on this basis, even though that's beginning to shift as well, is that when you bring in contracts, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, where your base levels are, how the interaction is supposed to be in the dressing room, how you relate to each other and all of those things, is that with these things that we're talking about here, I feel these are dark forces moving through people who've suffered in some way, who've suffered their own shame, who've lived in or experienced broken homes, lives, or just socioeconomic factors that have kept them oppressed for long enough that something's broken in them, or whatever the myriad of factors are. When it comes to sport, this is how it is, and this is what it looks like, and this is what we have to do to win the game, and it's all there, and it all sounds fantastic. Is that true enough? And enough of it to know how fantastic it sounds, but I also know that once the doors are closed and all of this is no longer part of the conversation, another force takes over, and it's a little bit more of that darker force.
Yeah.
And I think that darker force is probably what's most interesting, which does no service, obviously, to the women that you come across. I don't mean interesting in that sense of it, like, not, you know, interesting in that this is where this is being caused, I think. And I think that the potential for sport, and there's potential in the dressing rooms that you work in, or that I go into, or that any of us go into, is that there's more willingness to challenge that stuff in a way that it's not threatening or it's not forceful.
Absolutely.
But there's just an open exploration of it, where there's a little bit more of an invite to it. And I find that because often the coaches or the people involved, often sports psychologists and these people who come and tell us about performance, because they haven't done that work themselves, they're not able for the vastness of what's going on for people, and they're not able for that shadow side. And so it's kind of left to one side, and we focus on these are the KPIs, and this is all of this lovely shit, to me, to be honest, that's not of real value as to why we're making the decisions that we're making, and how it impacts the game as well, like how this impacts the game, and it does.
But it takes courage. It takes courage. And the thing is, it shouldn't be, it was really interesting, as part of this training that we did, they did a role play for us about a scenario where there was two guys and there was a girl, and she was talking about this other girl that was going to come in to the meeting, and the lads were going, oh yeah. And in the training, they were saying that she should call it out, the two lads were. But for me, a much more powerful message is if one of the lads calls it out. You know, men have to take responsibility, and it does take courage, and it's not easy to change, because change is hard, change is different. But there are men, and Diarmuid, you probably know this, and you've probably seen it and maybe experienced it. And look, to be fair, we've probably all been guilty of it sometimes, where we tolerate something we shouldn't because you just don't want to cause a scene. But that's potentially more damaging because you get what you tolerate. And it's, if you experience it or hear it, you have a responsibility to call it out.
I think what's really interesting in what you're saying is that actually we can approach this from a purely self-interested place. This is good for everybody. You know, this isn't about men doing something for women. This is, you know, you talked about, you know, increasingly, you know, elite soccer is recognising the value of good judgment. Of good decision making, and that is becoming one of the most valued thing in a player. I mean, that turns everything around, you know, because that then, you know, if you're making good decisions on the pitch, it means that you need to be making good decisions elsewhere as well. That, you know, you'll understand those two as fitting together, and what you're looking for is qualities that will make for, you know, a safer world for everyone, frankly. You know, so really this is about self-interest. We've always recognised that, you know, the key to preventing sexual violence and the prevalence of it is actually gender equality. And the bit about gender equality is that nobody loses out in gender equality. We tend to think of it as that. I have to give up something to someone else. But actually, everybody benefits. So good decision making and the fact that elite sport is really recognising that this quality is probably the most important quality for a good player. You know, so if we have that at the top, if we have that understanding, and it's a self-interested understanding, this is how we get to be excellent on the pitch. And if we can think about how that then plays out in terms of across the country, in local clubs, local coaching, you know, what are we doing in terms of putting that value, running that value all the way through the whole sports organisation, the whole sports communities. I mean, that's what I'm really interested in, how we value that, how we place that value.
We do need to take a very quick break, so we'll come back to that and talk about that in depth. It is our Saturday panel in association with the Government of Ireland's No Excuses campaign. Enough is enough. Let's stop excusing sexual harassment and sexual violence. You can learn more at gov.ie/no excuses or in an emergency call 999. I'd love to get some texts in from coaches out there, people involved in coaching, as to their experiences and whether they feel that they have the backup and the education and the resources necessary to tackle any of these issues. 53106 is the text number, or you can get in touch with us on Twitter @OffTheBall, or you can DM us if you want as well, if you want to do it a little bit more private. We'll take a very quick break.
The Saturday panel on Off the Ball.
At Heineken, we like to think that life should be all for one and one for all. So if your team's had one of those games, why not meet the squad and relive it one last time? And whether you've lost or won, at the end of the night there's always room for one more tune. But if you're thinking about drinking and driving, then even one is one too many. After all, you only live once. Heineken. When you drive, never drink. Get the facts, be drink aware. Visit drinkaware.ie.
The road to a better world begins here with Toyota's incredible range of self-charging hybrids, where you're in electric mode on average more than 50% of the time you drive without plugging in, saving fuel and lowering emissions. That's the hybrid advantage. And now there are amazing offers, including trade-in boosters of up to €3,000. But demand is high, so don't miss out. Start your electric journey in a Toyota hybrid today. Toyota, built for a better world. Terms and conditions apply.
Christmas comes early to all Brown Thomas and BT2 stores. With 20% off almost everything, now is the time to shop for that special piece you've been longing after and find the perfect gift for that special someone you need to look after. With 20% off almost everything, Christmas comes early to Brown Thomas just once a year. Ends this Monday, the 2nd of December.
Dave O'Loughlin, 87 Waldorf Terrace, Knocklion, is cool with us, saying he'll be out shopping all day this Black Friday. Dave is an unapologetic tech geek. While he seeks out a TV with more Ks than you can shake a high-definition stick at, all his other gadgets will be at home, fully charged, just waiting to be picked up. Going shopping? No worries. The PhoneWatch Black Friday sale is now on. Get PhoneWatch installed for just €199. Monitoring fees apply. Sale extended until Monday.
Over the last number of years, AIB have been working to build a more sustainable business. We have invested in wind energy projects, launched a €5 billion climate action fund, signed a low-carbon pledge, and yet it's still not enough. We will keep telling ourselves that every day. AIB alone is not the solution to climate change, but we're doing everything we can to be a part of it. AIB, we pledge to do more. Allied Irish Banks plc is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
No matter what business you're in, at Electric Ireland we know that having partners you can rely on is more important than ever. That's why, as Ireland's largest electricity supplier, we ensure you'll get a plan based on what's best for your needs and ambitions. So join over 90,000 businesses already partnering with us across the country. To find out how we can help your business, now and in the future, visit electricireland.ie/business today.
3, 2, 1, lift off!
What have you done with my OCT eye scanner? I'm supposed to be doing an eye scan with Mrs. Green.
We launched it, like you said.
I meant launch it to the public, not on a rocket. You know, by telling them how it takes a hospital-grade 3D image that could help detect eye conditions up to 4 years earlier.
Oh, sugar.
And that it's available at Specsavers.
And now also in outer space?
Introducing our most advanced eye exam with OCT scans. Search Specsavers OCT to find out more. Charge applies. OCT available at selected stores.
This Black Friday, get instant cash back on our huge range of LG, Sony, Samsung and Panasonic TVs. For more information, go online to powercity.ie or call in store today.
Bargain Town's Black Friday weekend sale now on. 20% off beds and mattresses this weekend only. Sale ends Monday 6 p.m. So hurry on down while stocks last. Bargain Town.
Everybody stop what you're doing and don't miss out on the biggest Screwfix Black Friday event. You'll find unmissable deals on everything from drills to CCTV kits to help you get the job done for less. But hurry, our Black Friday deals end on Monday 2nd of December, so visit screwfix.ie now. Screwfix, here when you need us. While stocks last, visit screwfix.ie for T's and C's and delivery details. Prices valid until Monday 2nd of December.
This week at Dunnes Stores, we've got some great festive offers. Like Budweiser, Carlsberg and Coors Light 500ml 24 packs for just €20. And McVitie's Victoria Biscuits 550 gram for just €3. Plus save more with our 10 off 50 grocery voucher. Dunnes Stores, always better value. See online for terms and conditions. Minimum spend required. Please drink responsibly.
Across Ireland. This is the IMRO Radio Awards Station of the Year. This is News Talk.
It's 2 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Adrian Harman. Counting of votes is continuing this afternoon in the 4 by-elections. Sinn Féin's Mark Ward has topped the poll in Dublin's Midwest at 24%. Fianna Fáil's Padraig O'Sullivan's on course to top the poll in Cork North Central. The party also looks set to top the poll in Wexford by-election, but the final tally shows Fine Gael and Labour are in with a chance. The Green Party looks set to win its first ever by-election in Dublin Fingal, with Joe O'Brien taking back the seat long held by former party leader Trevor Sargent. The Justice Minister says Dara Murphy needs to set the record straight about his Dáil attendance record and claimed allowances. Charlie Flanagan's comments follow calls by Fianna Fáil for the Oireachtas to investigate his Fine Gael party colleague. Deputy Murphy, a Cork North Central TD since 2011, also holds a second job based in Brussels and has drawn his full salary, travel allowance and parliamentary standard allowance despite having the lowest attendance record. A man's appeared in court in the north charged with murdering a baby boy. 11-month-old Hunter McGlennon died in Cady, area of County Armagh on Tuesday. 31-year-old Shariar Ali has been remanded in custody and is due back in court next Monday. And the Taoiseach Simon Coveney is playing down reports Lisa Smith is set to be deported back to Ireland in the coming days. It's been suggested the Dundalk woman was due to be deported back to Ireland from Turkey this weekend. That's all for now. More in an hour.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to the AA, you can find our lowest car insurance price online, guaranteed.
Mostly cloudy and dry today with the odd shower affecting South Munster and Leinster. Maximum temperatures of 9 to 11 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
You're very welcome back to our Saturday panel. Today it's in association with the Government of Ireland's No Excuses campaign. Enough is enough. Let's stop excusing sexual harassment and sexual violence. You can learn more at gov.ie/no excuses or in an emergency call 999. And if you've just tuned in, we did mention that we are covering some pretty sensitive subjects over the next half an hour or so. So if there are any younger ears listening, you may want to tune back in then. And you can listen back on offtheball.com or download the Go Loud app. I'm joined in studio by Lisa Fallon, who is currently a coach with the Chelsea women's team, but formerly involved with Cork City, Northern Ireland and many other teams down through the years, by Cliona Sadlier, who is the Executive Director of Rape Crisis Network Ireland, and by Lisa Lyng, who is a former Wexford hurler and very much man of the world these days. It's great to have you all in studio. We're getting a big response. We'll touch on this again, I've no doubt, over the next few days and weeks. We're talking about that dressing room culture, Gizzy, and things happening and being able to speak out. And when you think back through your career and incidents that may have cropped up, whether it was bullying, a joke that went too far, comments about women, like, did you feel in a position whereby if you weren't happy with something, you could stand up and say, enough is enough, and you would be listened to, that the processes were in place, that a coach would step up and you would get the support there, or that your teammates would step up and say, you know what, you're dead right, I was uncomfortable about that, I'm glad somebody's stood up? Or was it a culture of, you know what, we're all in it for the good of the team, you just keep the head down, you keep rolling on?
Which is for the good of the self, really. That it's a bit more selfish, that it seems like the good of the team. I've no recollection of any time where something happened to somebody in a dressing room that I felt induced shame or, as in the ad, a bullying. But I am conscious of the fact that I grew up in dressing rooms, and maybe what was normal to me may have been abnormal for other people. I mean, I often think about why there's so few maybe artists, musicians, creatives, per capita GA players in the country. Maybe the arts and sport don't mix so well, but sometimes I feel that very much competitive age of the dressing room and the ones who hold the power of the dressing room, which is generally one or two people who dictate and everybody else kind of works up to that point. I think they tend to be a little bit sharper and wiser to it, and they realise it's not a culture that they want to be part of. And there was obviously formative experiences as I was growing up, and probably when I was maybe at the stage of playing at top level, that wasn't there so much. But I'm sure there were plenty of formative experiences that I missed out on because I just thought, well, this is what happens. I wouldn't have been as savvy to it. During my Wexford hurling career and with St Martin's, I didn't feel the culture of the team with Wexford in particular was a particularly positive one, but that was more to do with performance. There'd have been joking, like there'd have been what's referred to as banter, and still to this day it mightn't meet a requirement outside of the dressing room, but I don't feel that it was anything that would have gone on to, or led on to anything that would have been concerning. And I think that has, again, it's back to a similar point maybe, but I feel that has to have its place in some respect as well. If it's
would there be an acceptance in a dressing room of homophobic language, misogynistic language?
I mean, there's a difference between what's civically accepted and what we would accept socially, and I think that
should there be?
Until the civic engagement is more honest, I think probably, yeah, because I think that there are judgments sometimes that are made about what's. This is very definitively one thing. That's a racist thing that you said. If you've got, Lisa was talking about unconscious biases earlier, there's unconscious biases that operate in ignorant places or maybe in darker places in people, and they're not aware of them. And until they're aware of them, there's certainly not much forgiveness. If you throw out something that's comes from a place of ignorance or a lack of knowledge online, you'll be met very, very quickly with call-out culture that serves the person who's who's doing the call out in many respects, but there's certainly no empathy or desire to actually have a normal conversation with the person, say, you see the damage this is doing, this is the effect of it, you know. So I think that it's a very fine line, and I couldn't apply it to a broad range of different topics. There probably were times where stuff needed to be called out and weren't. There is always going to be an element of self-protection, of uncertainty, of there's these people in the dressing room and who might say anything. Your own uncertainty as a man, your own uncertainty as to did that cross the line or not. Like a few weeks ago that was okay, now it's not. There's things to balance, but definitely the more we ground our sporting context, I think, in that place where a real strength comes into the men who play sport, just from my experience, not to exclude women, just from my experience of it, the more that's put to the fore, to my mind, instead of hitting your targets and all of that high performance stuff, I think the more that stuff will peter out very naturally, because we're talking about the development of the whole person then, and that's, to me, it's coming into the language, it's coming into the engagement with the youth very much, but it's not seen at high performance level as much. But again, it's changing. Connection is becoming a part of training now. I know the Dublin lads were very successful with a little bit of a difference in how the coaching was done. Tony Griffin had worked with the Dublin hurlers a few years ago or two with great success as well, and there were shifts in what high performance was versus a little bit more of stepping into your power as a man, and that involves very naturally not being disrespectful to people because you're holding a position of strength, and that's not in any denigration of anybody else, because you don't need to denigrate anybody when you're in power, you know.
Can I pick, because I agree with most of what you're saying there, but I want to explore a bit that piece about that words don't have power. I feel like that words don't translate to action in terms of negative, you know. Still, I mean, you mentioned racism or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a few stats here. I mean, I'm not an expert about sports, and we're talking about sports and locker rooms and people are in sports, but actually, you know, this is the whole of society, you know, where maybe there's some concentration of aspects of this that are happening in locker rooms, but it's all of society, so it's not to pick in particular on people in sports locker rooms. One of the things that we pay attention to, for example, is how women in particular are portrayed around the sexualisation of women, and men's role around the sexualisation of women and the objectification of women, to use these words. So for example, you know, how much we consume pornography. And pornography is by and large the images produced that are depicting men's violence against women, usually violence and degradation against women. There's increasing levels of violence and degradation involved in most pornography now, in mainstream pornography. So research that came out last week from Jigsaw found that 73%, 1% off, of young men, 18 to 25, were watching pornography, consuming pornography at least once, if not more times a week. The number for women was 17%. We also saw then today there's new research out, because and this is UK-based research, but I can't see that we're not going to be far behind them. So the question is, you know, how does that leak into real life? So one of the things we've been keeping an eye on is increasingly there's a defence in court being brought forward that women are consenting to violence during consensual sex. So that increasingly sex is becoming violent. Increasingly women are coming away with bruises, they're being choked, they're being gagged, they're being spat on as part of normal, you know, what has become normalised sex. So this research today, and you know, so they asked young women in the UK under the age of 40, and 38% of the women under 40 said that they had experienced sex during consensual sex where non-consensual violence happened. So they were choked, they were gagged, they were spat on, hair pulled, left bruised, and this has become normalised in sex. So when we talk about, you know, the way that it's, so back to a WhatsApp group in a locker room, just to take it right back, you know, and we're talking in derogatory ways about women, about sex, we're talking about doing things to women, to women's bodies, and we're talking, you know, a lot of that talk, and not all of it, I'm not, you know, privy to all those conversations that are happening in men's WhatsApp groups and other locations, but a lot of it is around, you know, the pursuit, you know, the score, the competitiveness between men, about, you know, the pursuit and the getting and the doing of things to women. So I think it's just that piece of joining up the dot and going, it doesn't stay, it's not a harmless thing, it's not just words in a WhatsApp group, there are impacts in real life.
And also, has the education, and maybe even over the last 18 months around consent, has it almost been overly simplified that no means no, and men can come round to this now that no means no, but yes doesn't necessarily mean yes, that there are different shades of yes, whereas actually it's been overly simplified that for young men now to think, okay, she said no, that's fine, I can accept that, but if she says yes, well, all bets are off, that there's actually
and in
far
fact,
more angles within
and in
that.
fact, in this research, what most of the women said was they weren't even asked. So when the choking happened, they weren't even asked. There was no conversation, there was no broaching it. It was introduced as something that was normal and expected, and that they were shocked and traumatised by. Yes, I think absolutely we're keeping an eye on, and we're a bit concerned actually where consent is going, in that sense, that whole consent classes, etc., that is becoming a tick box exercise that actually isn't dealing with the really significant thing that it needs to deal with, which is gender inequality, which is sexism, which is misogyny. You know, if you don't have those things in the room when you're talking about consent, then, you know, because there's power relations in that negotiation of consent, and if you're not talking about that power relationship, then you're not going to be able to negotiate proper consent.
How difficult, Lisa, is it when you're actually out on the field, when you're in the dressing room as a coach, to bring forward these type of conversations? Because you said, you know, the culture quite often in dressing rooms is of winning, and first and foremost success is judged upon winning, maybe not about creating a better human and someone will offer more back to a club as the years roll on, that winning the next match, winning a title is the sole focus. When you go and try and have these conversations, or when people are around the club, is there generally a lot of support, or is it that, do you feel that box-ticking exercise of, all right, we better do this, have this consent conversation because we don't want our club to be dragged into this, but if it does, at least we said, look, it was the lads, it was an individual decision, it's nothing to do with us?
Well, firstly, I think it's probably quite important to point out that these statistics are based on society, not isolated to sport. And I think it's really important that we make sure that we're not talking about this just in isolation with sport, that this is a wider societal issue.
I would argue that sport is probably worse, because it brings together, it's one of the main areas where large groups of young men are brought together.
But by saying probably, it's an assumption. So it's that comes down to things like pack mentality and stuff. Is a dressing room environment a place where that type of thing can be harboured? Of course it is. However, what I do think is, firstly, the one thing I will say is, as a coach, have I ever had to tackle this issue in professional men's sport in my 10 years of doing it? The answer is no, because it was actually not, it wasn't something I encountered personally, okay, first and foremost. The second thing is, have I seen other people being the subject of it? I also haven't. Now, is that because I'm there?
That they're acting differently because
is it because I'm there? Does my presence there change that the potential for that behaviour?
Which may actually prove the point that they do realise that this is not acceptable behaviour.
So this is my point. However, have I been subjected to sexist remarks or sexist comments? I absolutely have. But the interesting thing for me is that generally they came from external environments, not the environment that I was working in. Perhaps an opposition environment, or perhaps a wider sporting environment, but not the environment that I was in. And sometimes I've heard, like, lads go to say something and someone like, leave it off, can't say that. And it's possible that that's because I was there. It's possible that it is. So
I think the statistics would suggest that it is a certainty. There is no chance in the wide earthly world that any team that you've worked with, any team that I've played on, are immune to these statistics. I mean, I can't tell you of the fellas who I played with who they are, but I know that. I mean, I know that this is very clear. Now, it may be in places of, I don't know, would there be a socioeconomic breakdown, geographical breakdown, the type of people who play GA, soccer, rugby? I've no idea. I think we've seen that.
Are you saying that this is are you saying that this is the majority or a minority of people?
Oh no, I'm saying that the statistics are the statistics, and so whatever, if we're working in a group of 30 people or 40 people or whatever it is, and 40 of them are male, then
it's in the room.
Some of them have at least contributed. So even if you've never seen it, like, and this is part of the performance culture sometimes, it's like, well, we deal with what's here, but what's here is what's here. You just can't see it, but it is there. And so if that's there, is there a potential, a possibility, a responsibility, or no responsibility of a sporting organisation or somebody involved in a sporting context to take it on? I think that's a big question for sporting organisations, for people who are interested in performance, for managers, for coaches, sports psychologists, or whatever it is. One of the ways of doing it, I think at least, is by taking it, as you kind of did at the start, Cliona, to strip it way back and see what's going on for people in a sporting context, because that's a language that they understand. Now, if we could give an example of that, we'll say somebody, it was a very common thing, probably every single game that they ever played, the manager would say before the game, don't foul. Because if you give away more frees generally than the opposition, the statistics show that you lose the game. That's for a variety of reasons, but anyway, that's what they used to say. So they say, don't foul, don't foul, don't foul, and that was the mantra all the time. And then somebody would get turned, wing back, and he might be a little bit overweight, or he mightn't be feeling the best, or whatever it is. And he knows that if that wing forward turns him and burns past him, he's going to be in front of 40,000 people. He's going to be unveiled. His fears are going to be unveiled, that he's too slow, that he's overweight, that he's not in his power. So he gives a little pull on the turn, so this situation doesn't develop. At no stage in the 20 years that I was involved in the GA did anybody ever hold that situation. And it happened. It could happen once a game. Like, at no stage did anybody ever say, okay, this is what happened, why did it happen? And where we tease out that possibility, where it said, okay, this maybe is this is the dynamic behind that. It just was kept at, if you don't foul, we win the game, and it was kept at that level. Whereas when you start bringing out, because you're starting to bring up shame then, and shame, as I understand it anyway, is the root of both the aggressor and the victims who actually end up believing that it's their fault and lay silent for so long, and they stunt all of their creativity and their work in the world. That shame is never, that level of conversation doesn't take place. Is it something that we should do? I mean, that's maybe a different debate, I don't know, but I definitely think it's a possibility through a sporting context to shine a light on some of these things that are going on for lads, in a way that they don't feel as threatened by it, or they don't need to be as defensive. It's just, okay, this is what it is, and we're all going through it. We're all feeling different parts of it. I've gone through it. I've crossed lines, definitely, in my past as well, that I'm not proud of. And a little bit of acceptance in that brings a development and understanding and a relaxedness that I don't need to. That shame doesn't endure, and then you don't become part of these statistics then, but if it's allowed to fester outside in dark rooms or WhatsApp groups or wherever it is, it does. I understand what you're saying. It leads into this in a very, very natural way, because I think if it's stunted and it hasn't been dealt with, it's going to be waiting up ahead to trip you up somewhere. That's what we know from our...
That's why I was saying earlier that I think, because it can be harboured in certain places where it's not allowed out, because there probably is a general acceptance that type of behaviour is not normal or it's not right, that it needs to be called out in those cells, because until it's exposed, you need people who have courage to call it out. You need people who know deep down that it's wrong or that it's not right, but that they've maybe conformed to it a bit because they felt they kind of had to, or they felt they needed to be accepted by the group. And that's pack mentality, that's formation of teams, and that's people who are inexperienced trying to come in and prove themselves and stuff like that. But it does take courage, and it does take people to know what's right and to have that ability to stand up and not, as you said, like not feel shamed for doing it. But I think the more it gets called out, the more people will be recognising that that is the way to do it. And it's, again, it's that awareness, because there are some, in some cultures, that is normalised behaviour. So people are not even potentially aware that that behaviour is not right.
I mean, this is the stat on the 74% of young men, you know, consuming pornography at that level. They have, if you like, a lot of them have an understanding that that is what sex looks like. So they're not even knowing they're crossing the line. They're not even knowing they need to ask for consent. I'm interested in what you said around the, you know, your presence.
In its entirety?
Your presence. Sorry.
In its entirety, do you mean? I was trying to just like the 76% who look at porn. Like, is it accepted, or is it assumed that all of those people assume that that's what sex becomes, or like surely there's a lot of nuance there, and obviously there's, you know, the other 20 I'm doing my math, 26% are watch pornography to a lesser extent as well. They're not, you know, there's only some who don't watch it at all, you know, so there's gradations of this, and there will be, but what we're seeing is that there is leakage into normal, you know, normal sex. Yeah.
But I suppose one of the things that I'm interested, because we're talking about intervening and calling out and stepping up, and actually the most effective way altogether, and the normalisation of this sort of behaviour, is that we don't have the normalisation in the first place. So we go right back to the beginning. And so I'm wondering what, you know, at this level, and what we're learning at this level, because these are grown men by and large we're talking about, you know, they've been brought up and reared in our culture, they're well established in our culture. What is it we learn here that we can take back to, you know, those pitches all across Ireland where there are kids running out on a Saturday morning? You know, what is the learning? How do we build a culture in the first place that doesn't normalise this? And it's not, you know, there's the bit where occasionally we do that piece of, if you put a woman in the room, it changes the dynamic, and it does, because men know already that this is not something they'd want their mother to see them saying, you know, for example. So they'll discipline themselves there. They'll rein themselves in on that front because a woman is in the room. And sometimes what we do is we say, well, we'll mix the team at junior age, so we'll have girls and boys playing together. Great. But actually what we're doing there is we're really sort of saying, you know, what we often say find ourselves saying is to the men going, it could be your sister, your mother, your wife, you know, and, you know, it's all, but actually, you know, it could be any woman. They don't have to belong to you. You don't have to know them. You don't have to do it for them. Do it for you.
So what is happening? Because I'd imagine after the Belfast rape trial, there was a rush probably to organisations like yours from sporting bodies of tell us what to do, tell us what to do. And that can become a box-ticking exercise. And have you figured out a way of having those initial conversations with the very top line of the sporting organisation as to how they feed that down to the grassroots, to the front line, to the coaches who quite often are volunteers who are coming in, particularly away from the elite level, who are just coming in, who want to help out, and then who want to win, but have no experience of dealing with, as Gizzy touched on, like people who have these darker forces of things that have happened to them in their past that have created this type of personality. They're not educated in how to deal with that quite a lot of the time. So when incidents happen, the easiest thing for them to do is brush it under the carpet as well, and then you end up with this culture. Like, how difficult is that?
This is the invitation of this. I mean, this is the big invitation here, because most of us, you know, it's unconscious. We don't notice ourselves doing it. You know, this is our culture. So, I mean, we're not thinking about it. We have the rules, we're given the rules. So the really big and the really important piece of work that we have here is to become conscious of all the ways that we have been taught and trained to treat men and women differently, and everyone else, and to think about sex in that context, and women, you know, the roles that we give the genders, you know, to really become conscious of that, because until we actually can see it, we won't be able to change it. So the clubs, I mean, I suppose the initial was, you know, do we just, after the Belfast trial, is it a matter of giving some courses to the players, the elite players, and it's like, well, actually, can we do a kind of whole of system think about it? Can we look at, for example, the culture of hierarchy, competitiveness? Can we ask, well, what values are we instilling? How are we instilling those values?
Do organisations want to have that conversation?
It's a much more sophisticated conversation. Are we building in, if you like, violence and domination? Are those values that we somehow maybe not, maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Not obviously, but not, we're actually training people in violence. So, for example, you talk about the fouling. In some sports, it's like you will have the tackle and the foul and the little sort of you learn how to, essentially commit violence on another player without being found out. I mean, this is part of the game, isn't it?
It's there, but I think at this point as well, it would be remiss not to say from a GA side of it, at least. I'm not sure I'm sure rugby is having a big thing for itself at the moment. I'm not sure what the realities of that will look like. But anyway, in the GA context, we've got the WELL programme that Pat Daly has devised in Croke Park, which, as far as I'm concerned, is by far and away the most progressive document that I've ever seen. And when you're talking about Cliona, you're talking about becoming conscious. I think one of the areas that there's just a gaping hole in that is the spiritual side of that, which sporting organisations are a little bit unwilling to touch. Socially, we're actually unwilling to touch that because we have of the hang-ups that we have from the church, and that's if you're like becoming conscious, like Jeannie, you can tell me, you can give me all the statistics in the world, and I can read as many Twitter comments as I want from as many women as I want telling me what it is to be a man or what it's not, and from as many men telling me. But until I go through these initiations myself, until I really feel these things and internalise these things and create enough space in my life to be able to internalise them and able to have the gravity of my mind to be able to understand them, of my heart and of my body. And those things aren't valued. They're not valued in a sporting context. They're not valued in a social context. The result of them is most certainly valued because it brings nothing but value into your life. But to create the space in which they can do that, you talk about you high performance athletes. I mean, you don't have time to. The SRI study that was done a couple of years ago initiated by the GA to try and. I mean, within the bubble, there's no time. There is no, and I'm not even talking about time for that kind of development. I'm talking about time for your family. I'm talking about have normal relationships with people in your life. So that's the scale of. That's where for me, that's where the scale of the problem is at. In some respects, is that to make conscious leaps, it has to be a much more. I mean, the language is all perfect now about developing the whole athlete, but I think that there's huge holes where you're not willing to go to certain areas within it.
We are unfortunately very tight on time. I suspect we could have been here for the next couple of hours talking about this, and this is just another step along the road of continuing this sort of conversation. 53106 is the text number. If there are people out there who have opinions, and I'm sure they do, particularly those who are at the front line, who are involved in coaching, who are in the dressing rooms and have questions and wondering what they can do in difficult situations, please do get in touch, and we'll come back to this again over the next few weeks, but we are out of time. Lisa, thanks a lot for coming to the studio. Cliona and Gizzy, it's been a pleasure. 53106 is the text number. It has been with thanks to the Government of Ireland's No Excuses campaign. Enough is enough. Let's stop excusing sexual harassment and sexual violence. You can learn more at gov.ie/no excuses, or on an emergency call 999. If you missed any of this, you can check it out. It's upandofftheball.com now, all our social channels, or you can get it on the Go Loud app. Thanks a lot, guys.
Off the Ball on News Talk. Screen Time with John Farty.
This week on Screen Time, with the arrival of The Irishman on Netflix, we take a look at the lesser spotted Scorsese. We ask if the knives will be out for Daniel Craig's